Welcome to the Econ Buff Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Stitzel. With me today is Dr. Ann Barthel, a professor of economics and decision management at West Texas A&M University. Ann, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So our topic today is the sport of curling. So I'm a sports economist, so we're going to kind of blend some expertise here. Ann is a special guest because she's a two-time German national champion, and she represented Germany in the Junior World Championships and the World University Games. So we have a bona fide curling superstar here in the studio today. So Ann, start us off. Just tell us what curling is. Americans, we get fascinated when we see it on the TV every 4 years, but we know nothing other than that. So fill us in. What is curling?
All right, so on TV, curling, I always describe it to people as, oh, that's the funny sport where you see people walking around the ice with their brooms. A little bit more formally, in curling you have two teams and they slide roughly 40-pound rocks down a sheet of ice towards a target. And most people compare it to maybe shuffleboard or bocce ball on ice. And so you have 4 players per team. Each of them gets to slide 2 rocks. And the goal is to score more points than your opponent. And the way you score points is by getting your rocks closer to the center of the target than your opponent's rocks. So that's pretty much it.
So that's fascinating. I think it's a little unfair to call it shuffleboard on ice, since the ice is probably the hard part to deal with.
True. The ice complicates matters. I mean, it's slippery, people fall.
So you said you slide it. How far did you say? How far the? You said a 40-pound rock,
rock
which is amazing,
pounds.
By the way.
Yeah. Oh, don't ask me to translate how long the ice rink is. It's kind of like just imagine your standard ice rink where you play hockey, and it's maybe not quite as long as that. It's a tad shorter.
That seems really long.
It's a pretty good distance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then, any idea how big the bullseye is?
Yes. We have so you have concentric circles, and the largest one is 12 feet in radius.
That's awesome. And so, at how many? I'm trying to envision it because I've seen it a little bit. But how many rings do we have from the?
3 rings. There's the 12-foot, the 8-foot, the 4-foot, and then the middle is what we call the button.
So the button is what Americans would call our bullseye.
Is the bullseye? Yeah, that's right.
Fascinating. So let's talk a little bit. Okay, so we set the parameters of you said brooms, actually, before I move away from this. What are they actually? Can you
what
give
are
us
the
any?
brooms?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're called brooms.
They
right?
are called brooms, yes. We call them brooms or brushes. Some people call
but I
them
can't
brushes.
go get my broom from my garage at home right now and play. I mean, I guess I could. I wouldn't be very good.
That would not be very good, and probably the people would hate you for bringing so much dirt onto the ice. So people you have to keep your broom clean because you don't want to bring dirt on the ice. But no, those are special curling brooms, and they have evolved quite a bit over time. So back in the day, it was corn brooms, and they would cause a big mess on the ice because part of the bristles would break off, and then they would be on the ice, and the rocks would catch on them and go in all sorts of directions. And then they evolved into horsehair brooms. Again, those horsehair brooms would lose hair, and that wouldn't be good for the rocks. And so nowadays they're just they look a little bit like a Swiffer broom, if you will, and they just have this polyester surface. And you can sweep much more efficiently with that than those old-fashioned brooms.
Do those wear out, tear up over time?
They do wear out over time, and actually curling had its first big controversy a couple of years ago over the brooms because the brooms were getting too good. So the brooms were essentially, the materials were getting so good that by sweeping in a specific way, like a specific direction, you could almost steer the stone. And people didn't like that because usually the main skill of the game is coming from the person who pushes the rock, the person who throws the rock.
Really?
And because that person controls how fast you throw it, so how long it's going to go, and that person also controls kind of the direction where it's going. And then usually with the brooms, what you can do is you can sweep, and then as you can imagine, if you sweep on ice, the friction is gonna melt the water, and so your rock can glide a little bit longer.
So it's about melting the ice.
It's about melting the ice, yeah. And
I always got the impression that it was literally sort of sandpapering the
No,
ice.
it's about the friction. It's about the friction melting the ice, and then on that water film, you can keep the stone from slowing down. So it's going to glide a little longer. And the other thing is, whenever the player releases the rock, they give it a spin. So they either spin it clockwise or counterclockwise. and then the rock is going. No, you can't just release it straight.
You can't throw it straight.
You can try, but what then happens is that the rock just randomly it'll pick one. So if you just try to throw the rock perfectly straight, it'll pick up either a counterclockwise or a clockwise turn.
So when somebody like me watches that sport, part of what makes it so interesting is you're throwing something that looks like a giant rock, and it's sliding so smoothly.
Right.
What is the rock itself made out of? Is that like marble or
granite?
Granite. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what do? They have some kind of coating?
I'm not sure. I mean, they polish the granite, and I mean, there's one island in Scotland where pretty much all of the granite for curling rocks comes from. And so that they take that granite from that particular island, and they make all the curling stones out of them.
So I don't mean to put you on the spot here because this is a hard thing to know, but it strikes me as the first place that we can really jump in with some economics there. Any sense of the cost of production for the curling stones?
I have no idea what the cost of production of a curling stone is. I do know that they're very expensive.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I mean, maybe we have a monopoly here for curling stones.
Yeah.
So what if only we have more curling stone producers, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was wondering. Is it because it could fundamentally be a cost of production problem? The stone is so rare. It's really something hard to shape and form potentially. I don't know if that's true, but just. So it could fundamentally be about the difficulty of producing the thing, or it could be monopoly pricing. Those could be.
My guess is that it's probably that this kind of granite is particularly good for making curling stones, and I think the cost of production itself is probably, I mean, yes, it's going to cost you something, but I don't see why you couldn't have somebody else making the same kind of stones out of different granite. I just think it's probably the quality of the granite that makes this producer a monopoly. And then also, I guess, consistency a little bit, right? If you imagine if you had different stones produced by different companies, well, then the stones are already different from club to club, right? I mean, from sheet to sheet, each stone is different. So what curlers usually do at the beginning of a tournament, it's kind of funny, they get a day to practice with the stones, and what you'll see all the teams doing is they're going to have somebody try to throw the stones as consistently as possible, and they will time them with stopwatches to make sure that they have that kind of consistency. And then they have somebody else chart down how far did that stone run, how much did it curl. So by how much did it curl, I mean how much of a turn did it take from that clockwise or counterclockwise rotation. So the stones don't run in a straight line. They always do a little bit of a curve. And then depending on the stone, if you throw the same two different stones on exactly the same path, you might get more or less curl depending on the stone. And so in the beginning of the tournament, the players are going to try to figure out, okay, which ones are the faster stones, which ones are the slower stones, which ones make more of a turn, which ones run straighter. And then they try to match them up as good as the best they can, so that one player has two pretty consistent stones.
So is that where the name curling comes from the fact that the stones curl?
Yes, that's where the name comes from.
So can we go back to the broom momentarily? So what was the problem with you said steering?
Oh, yeah. So the problem then was that with those new brooms, you were able to essentially direct the stone. Like if you had the person on the right of the stone sweep, one thing was happening. If you had the person on the left sweep, the stone would go the opposite direction. And so instead of really relying on the person who threw the rock to set it on the right path and have the right speed, you could do so much by sweeping, almost like some people compared it to a remote control, that you could almost remote control the stone to where you wanted it to go. And so it kind of took away from the skill of the player. It was more the skill of the sweepers. And the World Curling Federation, which is the main governing body in the sport of curling, at some point did a survey that they sent to all curlers, essentially, that they had registered anywhere. And people participated in the survey, and they asked, well, what should the game of curling be like? Where should the main skill come from? Should it be from sweeping? Should it be from throwing the stone? And I guess the overwhelming majority wanted more focus on how the stone is thrown and less focus on the sweeping. And so as a result, they started regulating what kind of brush heads you can have on your brooms, that ruled out those really, really remote control-like brooms for the players. So now they still have very good brooms, but you can't do as much as you could a couple of years ago when those crazy those crazy pads were out where you could just steer your rock where it made everybody look great because you could just steer the rock to exactly where you wanted it to go.
So, as a top flight curler yourself, where'd you come down on that issue?
I voted for, so I participated in that survey, and I voted for I want more focus on the person who throws the rock because I guess I'm a traditionalist in that sense. I think that's what really makes the game interesting, that you have people who just have such precision, such good sense of how fast they need to throw the rock. And yes, the sweepers should be able to do something, but we don't want it essentially to just come down to sweep left, sweep right, sweep left, sweep right. So, yeah.
So, as somebody who watches the sport, you don't pick up on that, and maybe it's just because I didn't listen to the commentary when I was watching. It seems like the sweepers are doing the work. I mean, you can see that they can't move the stone that far, but I guess I have a misperception then about the game if you're saying, okay, well, the thrower, that's the talented.
Right. I mean, I think from the viewer's angle, you could, unless you knew what was going on, you couldn't really tell the difference between somebody sweeping with like an old-fashioned broom and somebody sweeping with the new broom. I guess that's something that, the people who played and who experienced the difference, they could tell the difference.
So that leads us perfectly into sort of a little conversation about what does team formation look like? Do you have one thrower and a set? First of all, so how many people on the team, do they fit into certain roles? Do they take turns doing the different roles? How's that work?
Yes, so you have 4 players on the ice. Usually teams, or oftentimes teams, also have a substitute. You don't sub those in during a game usually. It's more during the course of a tournament they might come in at some point. But so you have 4 people on the ice. The first player is called the lead. Each player plays 2 stones. So the lead goes first, then the second player is called the second. The third player is generally the vice skip, and then the fourth player is the skip. And by skip, we mean it's kind of the team captain, the one who decides the strategy. So the skip is the one who usually stands at the other end of the ice rink, and they're the ones who will hold down their broom as the target for the thrower to aim at, and then they will also decide, okay, this is what we're going to do with our next move. This is what we want to do with this rock.
And so those are set things throughout a game? You said each person throws 2 stones, and then you describe the position. So we would, like, if we were a team, we would rotate through those positions?
No, each person has their set position. So if I'm the skip, then I'm going to be skip for the entire game. And that means I usually always go last. I mean, you can change it up a little bit. The skip doesn't have to be the one who throws the last 2 rocks, but traditionally that's how it goes.
So you said you throw 2 rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Is that within? So you sort of have games within a match. Is that how that works, or sort of sets within a game? I don't know how
I compare it to baseball, right? In baseball you have innings. And in curling, we call innings ends. And so one end is each team plays their 8 stones. So it's team 1's lead goes, team 2's lead goes. Team 1's lead plays their second stone, team 2's lead plays their second stone. So the teams alternate, and you have the lead play their first 2 stones, then the seconds go, then the thirds go, and then the skips go. And then once the skips are done, once the last stone of that end is thrown, then we count the points, and then we start over. We start the next end. So then the leads go again.
So everybody throws 2 stones per end.
Correct.
Very cool. So help me with this, because you said the skip stands at the end and gives the marker, but then the last 2 stones they're throwing, so somebody rotates into that position?
Right, so the third usually, the vice skip, the third player is the one who's going to come up, and it's also an opportunity for them to talk strategy a little bit more because the skip stones, the last 2 stones, are generally the most important ones of each end. And so the vice skip and the skip, they're going to be talking strategy, and then the vice skip stays down there and will hold the broom as the target for the skip. And the other 2 players, the ones who are not throwing the stone and not standing at the other end, those are the ones that you see sweeping. So that's generally mostly the lead and the second. So those 2 players. So
for the first 6 stones, we have the skip down at the end.
Right.
And so then the other 3 rotate between throwing and sweeping.
Correct, yes.
And then, so skip never sweeps then?
No, it's a joke in curling that the skips are the ones who can't sweep because they hardly ever have to, right? I mean, the only sweeping that they do is in the back in the target area, because skips are allowed to sweep there, and we call the target area the house. And so skips are allowed to sweep the opponent's rocks once they have crossed kind of the line in the center, what we call the T line in the target area. So you can sweep the rocks of the opponent's teams once they cross that line. So that's what the skips do.
So if you're the lead and I'm the skip, and you throw and you hit an opponent's stone and it begins to move, then I could come in and sweep to help it accelerate out of the...
Right. Once it has crossed that line in the middle of the target area, in the middle of the house, then you can sweep it.
So given this new information, it seems obvious that the throwing should be the main part of the sport, because everybody throws too, and skips never sweep. So why would we want the sweeping to be dominating the game? That kind of makes intuitive sense to me.
Yeah, I agree.
As a non-curling fan or observer. My opinion doesn't mean anything, but I can see it. I can definitely see it. So you've said the word strategy several times, just in really broad strokes, 'cause I'm sure it gets into the minutia as it does with any sport. How does the strategy kind of play out within an end and across? What do you call a collection of ends? A game?
A game, yeah.
Okay.
And so we usually play either 8 ends, so 8 rounds of this, or 10, depending on what kind of tournament you're at. So championships are generally 10 ends, and each end lasts roughly 15 minutes. So a curling match is actually quite a lengthy affair.
Say that again. How long?
It's 15 minutes per ends, approximately.
Okay.
So if you play 10 ends, that's going to get you to 2.5 hours, right?
Wow.
And so it takes a while, and but yeah, in each end. So I lost my train of thought. What was I answering?
Oh, I'm sorry. I distracted you. We were talking about how many ends make a game, and then how long it takes to those independent things. So.
Oh, and then you were getting towards strategy. That's
exactly.
Right. So yeah, within each end you have your strategy is usually to score points, even though sometimes you're in the funny situation that you don't want to score points. So the reason for that is that in curling, it's a really big advantage if you're the team that has the last rock. So curling has a very clear last mover advantage in each round, if you will. Because, I mean, the reason is obvious, right? If I'm the last one to go, even if at the moment there are only your rocks in the target area, I can still change that. I can still put mine in the center and score a point. So being able to go last is really important.
So I don't think we've mentioned the scoring strategy. How does that work? All the stones in the house count? Only the ones closest? Or?
Only the ones. So all of my stones that are closer than your closest one.
I see.
So it could be that you have all of your 8 stones somewhere in the target area, and I only have 1, but as long as mine is the one that's closest to the center, I still get a point, and all of yours don't count for anything.
So if you played against me, because I'm terrible, all of my stones would probably end up at the back or very short, and then you'd throw all 8 stones in the center perfectly, and you would have 8 points and I would have none.
Oh, that would be correct,
Right.
yes.
Okay. Or then, by some happenstance, I got a few in there, and then you would knock them out, and then you would throw a few of your own stones in. And so that's where the strategy sort of develops.
Right. So you want to try to, of course, score more points in the end than your opponent. And you also want to, if possible, have the last rock. And so sometimes, so the team that scores in any round is the one that has to go first in the next end. So scoring comes at the cost that the next round, the other team is going to have the last rock advantage. And so kind of one strategy is if you have the last rock, you want to try to score at least 2 points. Because you should always be able to score 1 point. So really to take advantage of having last rock, you want to score 2. Because if you imagine if I only score 1 point, well then you score 1 point the next round and then I score 1 point and we're never getting anywhere, right?
So how does that work then? You have the last rock and I have thrown and I have 1 in there.
Mm-hmm.
You would like to have last rock next time, but then I would be getting a point if you don't throw it in there. How does that strategy play out there?
So depending on, I guess, where we are within the match, sometimes, yes, you will have the other team, you will allow them to score 1 point. Generally, I mean, if I have last rock, I might score 1 and just say, okay, fine, I'll take my 1 and then I'll try to hold you to 1 in the next end. So that's one strategy. Sometimes at the end, if let's say I go last and the entire target area, the entire house is empty, right? There's nothing in there. Because nobody has put anything in there, then I might just throw mine through. I might just say, thank you very much, I don't want to score 1 point. I would rather try to score 2 points next round, because if nobody scores in one end, then the team that currently has last rock gets to keep it. That's usually a very confusing thing for people when they're watching it on TV for the first time, because they'll see that the entire house is open, there's nothing in there, and then all of a sudden they just completely miss, and people are like, why did he miss that shot? And reality is, no, he didn't miss the shot. He just, on purpose, made it go through so that they wouldn't score that 1 point.
So when I see all those tweets about, oh, these curlers are so terrible, they missed an open shot, they're actually engaged in the last rock strategy.
Correct,
that you're talking
yes.
about.
I mean, most of the time. It might be, sometimes they might miss one, right? I mean, that could happen too.
Well, this is the problem with Twitter, though. People reacting instantaneously to things they don't understand, not great. So,
well, yeah, it happens. And
but I mean, that's things like the Olympics is essentially what Twitter's for in my mind. Just like react to things you've never seen before.
Right.
So, okay. So we've talked about a little bit about the scoring and the strategy, and I think we kind of have a picture of that. One of the things that I wanted to ask when we were talking about brooms, and it got away from me, we were talking about other things, was, how do people move about the ice in terms of, because it's ice, so I can't just be wearing my sneakers, I assume, but they're not wearing skates either. So what are they doing?
Yeah, so they are wearing specific curling shoes. Those are specially made shoes. Generally, a right-handed person is going to have a very slippery Teflon, or like some sort of what's the word? Some very slippery material. Sometimes it's steel. Surface on their left shoe, so opposite to your dominant hand, and if you're left-handed, the opposite way around. And then on your right foot, you're generally going to have a very soft rubber sole on your shoe, because that grips really well on the ice. So one shoe is very slippery, the other shoe grips very well, and so that way you can, when you see them throw the rock, you're going to see them going into that sliding position where they're sliding on that one foot and just dragging the other one behind them. And that's what you need the special shoes for. Yeah, you couldn't use skates. I mean, that wouldn't work at all.
So everybody, all four players are doing that?
Yes.
And for the same purposes of both pushing off, sliding, and throwing, as well as pushing and sliding while I'm sweeping, that's all the same purpose.
It's all this. You have the same shoes the entire time. What a lot of people use is they have something that we call a gripper. It's kind of a soft rubber thing that you can put over your sliding shoe.
Got it.
So if you don't want to, while you're sweeping, a lot of people like to just be able to walk normally instead of having to slide. So you just put the gripper over it, and that way you can walk even better than with like tennis shoes on ice.
So if I'm not doing that, if I have one slippery and one grippy, and I have to have sweepers on either side of the stone, if I have two right-handed people, then somebody's got the wrong foot to push off of. So how do you cope with that?
Yeah, that's a common problem, and you are just going to have one person sweep in a slightly uncomfortable position usually.
Well, so just suck it up is the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, okay.
I ended up being that person quite a bit on some of my teams, so it's
Sorry.
No, that's essentially all I was going to say. Like, it's just uncomfortable, and you just learn to deal with it.
So what's the physical strategy there? Because you're pulling, I can sort of feel the discomfort of what it would be like to drag myself along with my upfield foot.
So I always wore the gripper if I had to sweep on the other side, because then at least you can walk, and then it's just kind of you're twisted a little bit funny, and because your right hand would generally be the one at the top then when you're sweeping, right? If you're right-handed, you want to have the right hand on top at the top of the broom and the left hand towards the bottom, and that's going to be much more comfortable if I'm on the right side of the stone. But if I have to go over to the left side, then I'm kind of twisted around a little bit funny, but you you just kind of over time, people figure out a way how they can do it without
Sure.
it being too uncomfortable. Some people also just switch. I mean, some people just adjust their grip and they just learn to sweep the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense. So given your impressive resume here, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask sort of what positions you typically played. I assume you probably did a little bit of all of it, but...
In Germany, for the most part, I played second. So I was the second player, so I did my fair share of sweeping. And the second player, if I had to describe what it is that you do the most, is you're kind of a specialist for knocking the other team's stones out. So that's most often, once we get to the second player, that's when a couple of rocks are in play. And so the second player very often has to knock some of the opponent's rocks out. That was my favorite usually.
That's good. That transitions us really nicely into sort of strategy of actually how you throw the rocks. So if I were throwing the first stone, I'm not just going to throw it straight to the bullseye, because obviously that's going to give the next person an easy, they just knock me out or whatever, right? And so that obviously isn't a strategy that could work.
It actually sometimes is. You bring up a good point. So let's say if you do that, you throw it right on the bullseye. What to most people that seems like a really aggressive strategy, right? Like, I'm going straight for the center. I'm really trying to put pressure on the other team. Well, in fact, that's the most defensive strategy that you could play. Because what if you put it right in the center, well, then the other team, they can just knock it out. Well, then you can knock my stone out. Then I can knock your stone out. So we're going to be playing a very simple game of just knocking each other's stones out through all 16 stones. And we're probably going to end up with, well, maybe somebody scoring 1 point or nobody scoring anything, because we're going to choose to keep the last rock.
I see.
So that's a very defensive strategy. And that's how curling actually turned out to be for a long time, when the rules were very basic. And people were getting frustrated because that was just so boring to watch. Because people would play this for the first 7 ends and nobody would score. And then one team would score 1 point in the last end. So your curling match would end 1-0. And people were saying, well, this is stupid. We don't like watching this game. How can we make it more interesting? How can we force the teams to have a couple more rocks in play? And what they came up with was a rule that's called the so-called free guard zone. And that means for the first 4 rocks, and I think they've recently extended it to the first 5 rocks, if I'm not mistaken. But when I was playing, mostly it was 4 rocks. You can't knock out any of the rocks that are not touching the target area. So you have, if you look at so the target area are those concentric circles, right? And then there's also in front of those circles, there's a little bit of an area where you can place rocks. And if you put one there, we call them guards. So they're guarding rocks. Given that the rock doesn't go completely straight but kind of makes this turn, you can sneak rocks behind those guard rocks. And so since you can't remove those rocks that are out front, that are guards, with the first player's stones, well, it gives the players the opportunity to then have something else to work with, to have some guards that they can hide stones behind, and that'll make it harder for the other teams to get those out.
Okay, so let's talk a couple things. A couple things came to mind right then. One is when I'm throwing, do I have to start from the same place and sort of in the same place, or can the whole width of the ice be available to me? Can I start off to the right a few feet such that I can throw and curl it in a little more?
No, you can't. So there, at each end of the ice, you have something that looks kind of like a starting block. We call it the hack. And so every player has to start from the hack. And you have to put, if you're right-handed, you have to put your right foot into the left one of the hacks, and then if you're left-handed, there you can put it in the other one. There's 2 of them, one for the right-handed players, one for the left-handed players.
So then could I, and if I could, would it be an advantage to sort of come out of those sort of not straight down the ice such that I can create an angle to work with, or not? Right,
so that's what the skip who is standing in the back, they will place their targets, the target for the person to throw, sometimes off a little bit or always a little bit off to the side from where you actually want the rock to end up, because again, depending on the ice and depending on the stone, you're going to get a couple of feet of curl, right? So if you put your broom in the center and then I turn it, let's say clockwise, my rock's not going to end up in the center usually. It's going to end up a little bit over to the side.
Got it. And then, so that's the strategy that allows for sort of the throw and the sweeping combined to create the curling action. Because I don't even really need sweepers if we're just going to throw and bounce people's stones out at just one at a time, like the strategy that I mentioned first, potentially, right?
Well, you need your sweepers maybe a little bit, because what the sweeping also does is generally it takes away a little bit of that curl. So the more you sweep, the straighter the rock's going to run. So sometimes you need your sweepers because maybe the person who threw it made a little bit of a mistake, right? So, I mean, compared to something like chess, and curling is often called chess on ice, compared to chess, we don't have perfect execution of our strategy. You have the ice, you have the player, and sometimes maybe I wobbled a little bit when I was throwing my stone, or maybe I was just a little bit off the target. And so then by sweeping, they can try to keep it from making too much of a curve, or, well, they can't make it do more of a curve generally. I mean, not with the current brooms. With the super brooms, they could make it do more of a curve, but now that those have been outlawed again, they can't do that anymore. But yeah, so you need the sweepers even on those fast ones.
So that's very interesting. So the super brooms were allowing us to both flatten that out, make it straighter, and make it curl more.
Right.
Typically, with the whatever the regulation brooms are now, I can impart a certain amount of curl to it. It has or natural curl, or however you would, and all the sweepers can do is straighten it out.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Except for the very end, there's kind of this weird, and I don't know exactly the physics about this, but at the very end, when the rock gets really slow, then sometimes by sweeping a lot, you can make it dig in, and it just does a really strong turn. But generally, yeah, you couldn't make it curl more.
I've never seen that, but that sounds really cool.
It's pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah. So okay, we've talked about the game itself, the strategy, the players, whatnot. What does sort of I don't want to say day-to-day play, but what does sort of your common, not our World Games, not our Olympics, what does that play look like? You have leagues, you have tournaments. How's that work? How's that structured?
So for the recreational curler, generally what play will look like is that they go to their curling club once a week or maybe twice a week, depending on how often those curling clubs meet, and you're going to have a league within your club where you just have club members form teams, and you're just going to play other teams from your club. Then also you have tournaments where people travel to different curling clubs, and then you're going to be playing against teams from other clubs as well. In the US, we call those tournaments Bonspiels. Don't ask me why. Everybody assumes it's a German word, but as a German I can say, no, I mean the word Spiel, that's game in German, so I can see some sort of connection to German, but it's not a word that we would use in German. We just call it a tournament. So, yeah, I don't know. So
somebody really mangled some German word a long time ago coming over to America, and then it's just lost all its meaning, huh?
Yeah, and it just kind of stuck. So it's curlers in the US, you will always hear them talking about, oh, I'm going to a Bonspiel. Well, they're going to a tournament, yeah. And so those are generally on weekends, so they start on a Friday usually, and then Saturday, Sunday afternoon is when they conclude, so that everybody has time to get back home afterwards.
So when we think of curling, right, we think of the Canadian team a lot. You're obviously here representing the Germans well. And then, of course, there was a big stir about the American team in the previous Olympics, which hopefully you and I will talk about that here in a minute. Any idea where curling got its start? Is it originally a German sport?
No, absolutely. It's Scottish.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's from medieval Scotland. Yeah, right. If anybody's going to come up with a game like this, it's going to be the Scots. I mean...
Well, and the stones are there.
And the stones are there. That's right. Yeah, so it was in medieval Scotland, I think in like the 1500s or something like that. People first, for whatever reason, started sliding down big rocks, a sheet of ice, and it kind of went from there.
Well, it makes some sense, right? They've got the fjords there and that kind of thing, right? And so
yeah,
then a natural place for them to play.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right.
Okay, that's very interesting.
And then the Scots brought it to Canada. The Scottish immigrants to Canada, they brought the game there, and that's where it really started gaining popularity. I mean, Canada is the country with the most curlers in the world. And the Canadians then kind of brought it back, I think, to Europe after World War II. So, I mean, I remember playing in a club in Germany, for example, that was founded by Canadians that were stationed in that area.
So how do you get your start, since we're talking about league play, tournaments, whatnot? How'd you find curling?
How did I find curling? Curling found me. One of my friends in elementary school, her father used to curl. I don't know how he got started in it, honestly. He just kind of, somehow he was curling, and so she wanted to curl because that's what her dad had been doing. And so he told her that she needed to find 3 teammates to start a team, and so she just asked her friends, and one day at school, she asked me, do you want to be on my curling team? And I said yes. I went home and asked my parents. So I said I was going to be on this curling team. What is that, by the way? And then my parents were trying to explain it to me because they had heard about it. And yeah, so then I started.
You're lucky your friend didn't ask you to like ice hockey or something. Or
I know.
You'd been playing a contact sport. Yeah.
Could have been really bad for me, but no, it worked out. And my hometown happens to be one of the cities in Germany or towns in Germany that has a curling club, because we don't have terribly many. I mean, they're mostly located in southern Germany. And if your town doesn't happen to be one that has a curling club, well, then how are you going to start? I mean, that's like right here. I mean, we don't have a curling club anywhere here in the area, in the Texas Panhandle. I think the closest clubs would be in Dallas and in Oklahoma City, just to give you an idea.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with there being some curling. My PhD is from University of Oklahoma, and so I know there's an ice rink that's actually, of course, for hockey, and then the curling team meets there. And so if you've got Oklahoma City, Dallas, we're only talking cities of that size and up. Well, Dallas is as big as it gets almost, but like Oklahoma City and up.
Right, I mean, that's if you go to the more southern states in the United States. If you go to Minnesota or Wisconsin, for example, they have lots of curling clubs, and there you will have curling clubs even in small towns. They might not be big, they might only have 2 sheets of ice, but you're going to find a lot of curling clubs up there.
So really quickly, I'm gonna detour us just a little bit, talk about the connection between hockey and curling, are those 2 sports that fit well together and they kind of accepting of each other. They need, I guess hockey's probably slightly larger here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so is that how clubs get started, is they typically start on the ice of a hockey team?
Right. I mean, usually if somebody wants to start a curling club, what you would try to do is you would find the hockey rink, and you would try and see if you could rent some ice time from the hockey teams. And the thing is, our ice is slightly different for curling than for hockey. So, I mean, anybody who's seen hockey knows that the Zamboni comes out after a while, and then they run the Zamboni over the ice to kind of repair the scrape marks of the skates. And for curling, ideally what you would do is not run a Zamboni over the ice, because if you imagine the Zamboni doing laps, you're going to have areas where the ice is going to be slightly higher, you're going to have areas where it's going to be slightly lower. The blade of the Zamboni, when they scrape off that top layer of water, might not be perfectly even. And in curling, if the ice is not perfectly even, your rocks are going to start doing funny things. And so in curling, what you want to do really is you want to flood the ice rink. And of course you can't do that if you're playing on hockey ice, because it takes too long. If you had to flood the ice rink every time after there was a hockey game to prepare it for curling, I mean, it's impossible. So usually in the US we call them arena curlers. Those are the ones who play in hockey arenas. And yeah, they just kind of play on ice that's not ideal. And then you have the other clubs, and those are called dedicated curling clubs, and those are clubs that have their own curling ice. So nobody is going to be skating on that ice, nobody is going to be playing hockey on that ice. It's just for curling.
So you've played a little bit here in the U.S. You have experience with dedicated or arena?
So when I played in the U.S., that was when I was at the University of Kansas, and I went to Kansas City, to the Kansas City Curling Club, and they were playing on arena ice as well. Yeah, so they were at 2 different ice rinks in the Kansas City area during the time when I was there.
So what's your experience like going from an arena situation to a tournament where you're almost certain then to play on a dedicated surface?
Oh, it's always so much fun because all of a sudden the ice is not doing crazy things, right? All of a sudden I don't want to say it's easier because there's certain skills that you can't really develop on arena ice, because on arena ice you're constantly fighting the ice a little bit more, that you sometimes don't focus on some of the skills of just playing a solid shot because you're just always trying to trick the ice. So an arena curler is not always necessarily going to do better on dedicated ice. But it's fun if you go from arena ice to dedicated ice because you don't have those funny ridges where you just can't, or bumps in the ice that you just can't get over. I mean, sometimes on arena ice, you're going to have spots on the ice that you just can't reach. So it's sometimes really funny if somebody accidentally bumps a rock over there. You know, you hit your opponent's rock, bump it over there, and then the other team tries to get it out. It turns out you can't get there because the Zamboni left a ridge and you just can't get your rock over that ridge when you play it. So it might be funny.
So talk to us a little bit about those tournaments. Are there money in the tournaments? Are there you playing only for pride? I assume that's different in the U.S. versus Canada versus Germany. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I would say there are different levels of tournaments. So if a recreational curler wants to sign up for a tournament, it'll cost you an entry fee to go to that tournament, but that's usually to help the hosting club rent the ice, or because they're supplying the ice for you. And then, especially in the US, there's usually a lot of hospitality involved, so they're going to provide food for you at the ice rink throughout the entire weekend. There's some entertainment programs like a raffle or stuff like that. But usually it's just for pride, and there's no money involved. But then there are also higher level tournaments. They call them in the US cash spiels. And again, the word spiel. And there you can actually win prize money. And I'm assuming that means that the entry fee is going to be a little bit higher, and not everybody can enter those tournaments, right? I think they're going to be a little bit more selective in terms of who can play there. If I'm a no-name team coming from Oklahoma City, I might have a hard time getting into the prestigious cash spiels. And but if I'm a team that's known in the United States curling circles, of like, oh, those guys play at national championships, etc., then you might get in, and then you can win some money.
So are those invitationals, or do you have qualifiers for that kind of tournament?
I think they're generally more invitationals, where you want to sign up. They either send you an invite like, hey, we have this tournament, would you like to come? Or sometimes you might say like, oh, we would like to, if you have a spot open, we would like a spot, and then they can decide who they give the spot to. So 2 questions then. Question number 1 is you mentioned that the tournament is a weekend. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about how long it takes us to play a tournament. And are we talking about like Saturday, Sunday, or? Usually play starts on Friday. So I would say on your average recreational tournament, I would say the first game is going to be Friday afternoon, Friday evening. And then you're going to have maybe 2 games, maybe 3 if they have a really tight schedule on Saturday. And then generally the final rounds are going to be on Sunday morning. So oftentimes, if your team's not doing too well, you might be out by Saturday night, right? So they often have a format that they call like triple knockout or something like that. So that means you have 3 games guaranteed, but if you lose all 3 of them, then you're out. And if you happen to win somewhere along that road, then you might qualify for an additional game. So what are the size of tournaments sort of for a recreational versus a cash invitational type tournament? I think it always depends on the hosting club and how many sheets of ice they have. So I've been to curling clubs that have 2 sheets of ice, and so obviously they're gonna have to limit the number of teams that play in that tournament because, well, they can only have 4 teams on the ice at any given time. If you have ice rinks that have 8 sheets of ice, which they have in some of the bigger curling clubs, then you can have a whole bunch of teams. So you might have tournaments that are 16 teams, you might, or even smaller than that, and you might have tournaments that have 40 teams, right?
Do you have any idea what the most prestigious tournament in the U.S. is?
Ooh, I'm not sure what the most prestigious one is. I think they have a couple like in St. Paul that are pretty well known, but I'm not sure.
So the Twin Cities curling tournaments, probably.
Something like that, yeah.
So disclaimer for the listeners, I don't know anything about curling, so I was just making a joke. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you was, you talked a little bit about tournament play at the recreational level. One of the things we want to kind of talk about next is amateurism and the Olympics and that type of thing. Anybody out there making a good chunk of money, any idea what these cash payouts at these tournaments are?
So I mean, I can't say I've ever played in any of those really big ones and the really big invitationals where you can win a lot of money. I think the most my team ever won at a tournament was like 200 euros, which we were ecstatic about because everybody got 50 euros back at the end of the trip. But I've seen online, I've seen that the purse of some of those tournaments is like around $100,000. Not 100% sure if that posting was in Canadian dollars or in US dollars. That was a little bit unclear.
That's a US tournament, or?
I think it was a US tournament that I looked at, but I believe that. Oh, actually, no, that might have been a Canadian one. So it might have been 100,000 Canadian dollars. I think they are trying to create some tournaments for the elite curlers that are a little more lucrative, where you can win a little bit more money. But just to give you an idea, I mean, the top earning curling teams in the last couple of years made around $100,000 to $160,000 in terms of prize money
Per player?
No, for the entire team.
Okay, so that's a big difference, because if you make that per player, I'd call that a career.
Right.
But if not,
yeah, no, this is for the entire team. And just as a comparison, the top 200 tennis players in the world make that much or more. And I mean, the top tennis players make millions of dollars in prize money each year, right? I mean, if you look at somebody like Rafael Nadal, I don't know how many million he's made in prize money this year already.
Right.
So, no, I mean, in curling, the prize money is not going to be that substantial. And I think if you're a professional curler, you're not going to be able to completely sustain yourself only on the prize money that you can win. You're going to need some sponsorships and endorsements and stuff like that as well.
So is there such a thing as a professional curler?
There are some, mostly in Canada, I would say. Canada has teams that are professional curlers, and they have endorsements, and they earn money at these cash spiels, and they do that for the time being. I mean, you're not going to get rich, I think, being a professional curler, but those people can do it. They don't have a daytime job that they go to.
Interesting.
In some other countries, they've solved it in a different way. So, I mean, in Germany, for example, and I know some other European countries have a similar model, you have professional curlers through the military. So it's kind of a funny thing. Yeah, you have the Olympic athletes who join the military, and they're kind of in a special group. So they're not going to be the ones being sent to the front lines for combat, obviously. Those are people, they're going to do basic training, and so they kind of know what to do. And then they go off and they train for the majority of the year and participate in their competitions, and they get financial support through the military. And then after their season is over, they have to come back in and do a couple of weeks of some basic service in the military.
That strikes me as so strange.
I don't know. To me, it's a normal thing because, I mean, I grew up around it, right? I mean, that's just when you watch, and it's not just curling. It's pretty much all Olympic sports in countries like Germany. So
let's turn just a little bit. So we've talked about recreational play. We've talked about sort of cash invitationals. Talk to us about the big ones, which I think are, we've mentioned Worlds, and of course we all have Olympics in mind. Is there any other big time, this is what we're playing for kind of events?
I would say the Olympics are the highest one, right? Because it only comes around every 4 years. Then World Championships happen every year. And then sometimes you have continental championships. So for example, in Europe you have every November, I believe it is now, you have the European Championships, and I know Asia Pacific has a championship. I don't think North America has its championships.
Really?
So, well, because there's just not that many teams in.
Even with Canada.
Canada. Well, if Canada gets to field one team and the U.S. gets to field one team, and then maybe you're gonna have a team from Mexico join. Well, then you can play out a championship between three nations. Whereas if you go to the European Championships, I mean, they already have to divide the field into like the A tournament where the actual championship is happening, and then you have the B and the C level because there's so many countries in Europe and a lot of them have curling teams, so you have to qualify up to actually be allowed in the main draw for the championship.
So I was imagining a situation where you might have multiple Canadian teams and multiple U.S. teams.
Oh, well, that would be an interesting idea, but usually on those international level tournaments, each country gets one team.
Okay.
So in the Olympics, you have a field of 12 teams, and you can't have two Canadian teams. There's only going to be one Team Canada. There's only going to be one Team USA.
Which makes sense at the Olympic level. It's definitely not.
Well, in other sports, you get multiple entries per country, right? I mean, if you look at bobsledding, for example, you get Bob Germany 1, you get Bobsled Germany 2, Canada, I don't know. So in curling, no. And again, the reason is the tournament takes a long time. Each match takes 2.5 hours or a little bit longer. And then the format, how they play in the Olympics, is a round robin at first. So you have each team plays every other team.
Right.
So you start with 11 games, and then after that you move on to the playoff stage where it's like a semifinal and then a final. So curling is generally one of those sports that start at the beginning of the Olympics, and then they'll last until the very end of the Olympics. So as a curler, you're going to be busy almost the entire time.
So they can run probably entire bobsled heats in the time it takes one pair of teams to play a match in curling.
Right.
That's fascinating. So one of the things that's interesting from sort of a sports economics standpoint is amateurism versus professionalism, and especially how that ties in with the Olympics. So it sounds like you have a decent amount of world and international level events. We have some avenues that people could be professionals. How many of the people that I'm going to watch whenever I turn on the Winter Olympics next time play curling, those professionals, those amateurs, do you have any sense of that?
I would say by now the people that you see in the Olympics, most of them are professionals, or let's call them semi-professionals. So the Canadian teams, those are going to be mostly professionals. Some of the top European teams, they're going to be pretty much professionals. And then you have some countries where you kind of have a funny gray area in between. Like in the United States, they have which I found interesting, they have a program, I believe it's Dick's Sporting Goods, that hires Olympic athletes, and they can work at Dick's Sporting Goods either in management or on the floor, and they get a very flexible schedule. So they're probably only working part-time during a good chunk of their season, but they give them the flexibility that they can be gone for weeks at a time if they have to go, to the Olympics, to World Championships, or if they have tournaments on the weekend. Because imagine a regular employer, if I tell them, well, my tournament is from Friday to Sunday, so I'm going to need Thursday off to travel. And then to be competitive at the international level, I'm going to have to be going to tournaments 2 or 3 weekends out of the month. From September, that's when the competitive season starts, until maybe March. So half the year, I'm going to be gone almost half the work week. Right? I mean, some employers are very flexible, but I think that level of flexibility is a lot to ask for a lot of employers. So for that reason, the U.S. has a couple of these programs where, people can work part-time. So I would call those semi-professionals, because they still have a job, but they don't work a 40-hour work week necessarily every week.
So you mentioned that some of the Canadian teams get endorsements. You mentioned top-level tennis players. My guess would be, and I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, is that your top-level tennis players probably make about as much endorsing things as they do winning purses. That's very common in other sports. Basketball, for example, you say, somebody's contract is $30 million a year, but he's also making $30 million from Gatorade this year. So those are pretty prominent things. What's the endorsement? Any idea what the endorsement
I mean, a lot. I would say a lot less than in those other sports that you just mentioned. I don't really have a good sense of how much, but I know that the major sporting brands. I mean, you don't see Nike sponsoring curlers, or you don't see like the big companies that you would usually associate with sports necessarily getting into curling. So if you watch curling, oftentimes the brands that you see on the uniforms that the players wear, you're gonna be like, I don't even know what this is, right? I mean, there's some brands, but they're smaller sponsors, not the big time brands.
So who we talked about who makes the stones, who makes the brooms?
There are a couple of companies that make a couple of different brands that make the brooms. I can think of like 2 or 3 maybe that are commonly used nowadays by players.
Are they brands that we would recognize?
No.
So I'm sure a lot of the endorsements that top level tennis players get, they probably have entire programs for this, would be of the racket and shoe making companies themselves, because I'm sure somebody like Nadal is worth his weight in gold in terms of people therefore buying whatever brand head rackets or whatever he's using, that he's probably worth his weight in gold when it comes to selling rackets. So do you have a similar sort of, well, I only play with head rackets when it comes to curling?
Right. I think people definitely have their preferences. So I mean, you have like the 2 main brands I can think of are Balance Plus and Goldline in curling, and so you have some teams that are going to be playing with Balance Plus equipment, and then you're going to have the Goldline people. And yes, I'm sure
which did you play with?
I think I had a Balance Plus broom, and at some point I also had shoes from them. Yeah, but I was never really like, oh, this is the only brand I'm going to use. I mean, I've had my fair share of different brooms and shoes through the years.
So why is it then that people get into curling and play it at the highest level?
I think for a lot of people, it's just kind of, well, you get involved in a sport, and if in your sport the Olympics is kind of the pinnacle of the sport, the highest achievement you could have, then that's kind of what you're going to be striving towards. It's maybe still kind of that romantic idea of winning an Olympic medal, of just kind of how cool that would be. I don't know. I mean, when I started curling, I never ever thought that there would possibly be a way that I could be making money doing this, right? I was always aware that this was going to be a hobby. And of course, if you look at my career, you can tell that at some point my professional career became more important than my curling career. I very clearly made that choice, that I said, I'm not going to go to the place where I can have the best curling career. I'm going to go to the place where I can develop my professional career the most. So, I mean, I obviously made that choice. You might have other people who can combine it a little bit better, where it's like, okay, I can work towards my professional career, but I can also still be very competitive at curling.
So I want to turn now to a really classic sports economic idea, which is competitive balance, right? So competitive balance is the idea of how competitive, how close, how many different teams win. There's 2 different types of competitive balance. One is what we call within season competitive balance. If I'm explaining that to somebody and I'm using, your sort of classic American sports, that would be like, what are your win percentages look like throughout a league? So if you have a highly balanced within season competitive balance, that means a whole bunch of teams will be, many of the teams in the league will be huddled around 500 because sort of any given Sunday, any team can win. And a very disperse would be, there are some teams who have really terrible records and some teams who have really, really good records, and we're sort of spread out. Literally, we can think about dispersion of those kind of records. So what does within season competitive balance look like for curling? How competitive is curling?
So for one, you don't necessarily play league play as much, right? So I mean, here you would have to look at competitive balance across tournaments, I guess. You're gonna have lots of different teams winning tournaments simply because not everybody is going to be at the same tournament at the same time all the time. So teams can kind of avoid each other also a little bit if they want to. It's like, oh, if team so-and-so is going to that tournament this weekend, I'm going to go to the other one, so that you don't necessarily have to play them all the time. I mean, generally, I would say if you look at the World Championships from year to year, I mean, that's not within season, I guess that's already
right. So the next thing that I'm going to ask you is what we call between season competitive balance. And so that you could just literally think about championships. So what's the frequency and the concentration of championships, right? Because we could have a league where every year the within season competitive balance is very high, right? And so many of the teams will huddle around 500. It's hard to be a team that wins 70+% of your games. Baseball is a good example of this, as opposed to basketball, where you have a much wider spread, where you have some teams winning every game during the regular season, and then you have some teams who win 10 games in a regular season out of an 82-game schedule. So that could be, good or bad within season competitive balance. But your between season competitive balance could be really good. We just have a different champion every time. Or you could have tightly packed within season competitive balance, but the same teams keep emerging as champions. So maybe the within season kind of doesn't make sense. So talk to us a little bit about the between season. We have the same teams winning Worlds, the same teams winning Olympics.
So it's, again, the answer, typical economist answer, it depends. I mean, if you look at, in some countries, what you're going to see is that it's going to be the same team that's going to be representing country X on the world stage year after year. So to give you one example, look at Sweden, for example. They have been very, very successful on both the women's and the men's side. But if you look at the last, I don't know how many years, it's always been the same team that represents Sweden at the world stage, at European Championships, at World Championships, or at the Olympics. Also Germany, I mean, I know a little bit more how they choose their team and who represents them, just based on that I used to curl there. They also have had the same team representing Germany for the last, I want to say, 5 years, or pretty much the same team. I mean, some people have quit, new players have come on, but the core, I think, of that team is still the same. And part of the reason for that is how countries select their national team. So in a country like Germany, where you only have a handful of competitive teams, it's a little risky to say we're just going to have a national championship and then we're going to send whoever wins that championship to the World Championships. Because what could happen with that is that you just have one team that's really the worst out of the 5, but just by pure chance, they're going to be the best team during that 1 week when they play the German Championship, and then they go on to Worlds. Whereas another team would be much more consistent, right? They're technically the better team, they just had an off weekend that 1 weekend. If you're a country like Canada, where you have so many curlers and you have so many great teams, there you have a much bigger balance between the teams. There you can do that pretty easily, that you just have Canadian championships and whoever is going to win the Canadian championship has a chance at the world level. So I think in smaller countries like in Germany, also Sweden, they don't have as many teams, or Scotland even. They generally will have kind of a designated national team, and that team, even prior to the championships, they are already predetermined to be going, and they get a lot of the support from the federation. They are the ones who are the professionals. They will go to a lot of international tournaments, which of course over time doesn't help to grow a whole bunch of new competitive teams, because if it's already set in stone who is going to be going to the World Championships, well, if I'm one of the other teams, what's really if I can't earn money, right, if I'm not going to get rich doing it, and if I really don't have a good chance of making it to Worlds or the Olympics, then what am I playing for? So I think in some of those countries, if you have your chosen national team, it has made it even more concentrated, that you just have that one top team and not much else. Whereas in a country like Canada, I mean, you naturally have a large pool, but also everybody feels like in any given year, it could be us, right? So I think that kind of helps.
So when you see some sports, teams that play head-to-head or players that play head-to-head, the gap in skill is more or less predictive of sort of the outcome, right? So if I'm a top level tennis player and I sort of play a second tier player, chances are I'm going to win every time, right? And there's very few upsets in that setting. But you have a good NFL team play a sort of second tier NFL team, there'll be a fair amount of sort of scare quotes upsets in that setting. What's that like in curling? So if you're the better team, are you just winning every match against a sort of second-rate team, or is it fairly?
I mean, if it's like a really stark difference in ability, then yes, you should win every time. If you send me right now on the ice with the team and have me play against the world champions, I'm not going to stand a chance, right? But I mean, at the world level, even the team that wins the championship, I mean, they could lose to some of the other teams that will finish closer towards the bottom of the table, because once you get it to that 12 team field at the world level, those are all going to be pretty tightly packed. And yes, there are always those countries that are more likely than others to make it into the playoffs and win the medals, but it could also be that one of them just has a bad week and it's just not gonna work out for them. And then, I mean, I think it was at the last Olympics, I believe, on the women's side, Canada didn't make the playoffs, if I remember correctly. It was a big shocker that they were a great team. They should usually easily make the playoffs, but they just had a bad week and they didn't.
So you could have an entire week worth of bad performances.
Well, I mean, it's oftentimes, I feel like curling is a very psychological game. Like, it's a mental game. It's it's like shooting free throws in some sense, right? There's nobody in your face who is distracting you from your shot. It's really just you against your mind at that moment. And I think once things start not working in your favor, you start thinking a little bit more, and it's, oh, but we have to win this one, or if we lose one, then we're in a really bad position, we have to win. And in curling, you don't have much to distract you from those thoughts if you don't know how to deal with it. So I think it's easy if you have a rough first game and maybe a rough second game of the tournament. It's easy to get into this downward spiral where it's really hard to get out of. Whereas if you start out great, then you're like, oh, everything's perfect, and you just don't think much about what's going on, because all these players are good, right? All these players are great players. So in terms of being able to make I would expect all of them to be able to make certain shots every single time, but they don't. And it's the same reason why a basketball player who should be hitting that free throw every single time at the end of the game all of a sudden misses it, right? It's kind of the same idea.
So are there star level players that are sort of set apart from everyone else? Is there a LeBron James of curling, or we kind of don't have a deep enough pool for somebody to step out that way?
I mean, I don't think you have something exactly like a LeBron James, but there are definitely elite players that people will be like, okay, those are fantastic players that people would, in the curling world, would recognize. Yeah. So
I kind of want to bring this in for a landing here, and what I want you to send us off with just sort of a overview of how you see the state of curling, the trends. Is it getting more popular? Is it growing? Is it going to be the most popular sport in the world in 2030?
It's probably not going to be the most popular sport in the world in 2030, and I'm honestly okay with that. I don't mind curling being a little bit of a niche sport, but I do think that the Olympics have helped bring curling a little bit more in the spotlight, that more people now know about it. And if you look at curling clubs across the US, for example, you always see a little bit of an uptick in membership around the Olympics. Unfortunately, that usually fizzles out a couple of years later, so I don't know. There's might be a slight positive trend, but it's not like curling has exploded in any shape or form. Maybe after the win of the men's team in the last Olympics, that will change. We'll see. But yeah, I just hope that more and more people across the US get the opportunity to try it. I mean, there are definitely more curling clubs now than there used to be in the past. It used to be very concentrated in the north, like, as I said, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And now, well, we have clubs in Oklahoma City, they're in Dallas. I think Austin has one. Houston, I believe, has one. So even in the warm weather states, we're seeing more and more clubs spring up. So more people will have the opportunity to try it.
My guest today has been Dr. Ann Barthel. Ann, thank you for joining us on the Econ Buff.